You've probably heard it, said that the power in militaries is about the weapons or the budget or the bravado of the troops, the toughness and morale and things of this sort. But in my opinion, the real power, it's in its structure, in its reach, if you will. And what I mean by that, it's in the ability to act anywhere, anytime before the enemy even knows what hit them. This is why the US military isn't just the strongest on earth. To me, it's something entirely different. So, to put an analogy, think of a ever evolving doctrine, or better put, a global nervous system. So, think of it as a machine with eyes in the sky, teeth in the sea, and blood that runs through every corner of the earth in terms of manpower. So let me break it down for you here. So let's go over first the most obvious, power metric, which is budget. So very controversial now, very politicized, but there's over $800 billion spent annually in the US military. So that's more than the next 10 countries combined. But let me go over to what that gives you. So that funds everything from black budget research and development programs to humanitarian missions, all the way to AI weapons labs. On top of that, there's also a global force projection as well. So there's approximately something in the order of 750 plus US bases worldwide operating in 80 different countries. Along with that, there's 11 aircraft carrier strike groups, and these strike groups can launch a full scale war or disaster relief missions within 48 hours anywhere on the planet. To complement this, the US military also has technological supremacy. So think of things like the stealth fighter and the F 22 and the F 35 and these autonomous drones. And now they're testing these hypersonic drones as well. Along with that, you also have US Cyber Command and the Space Force, and they're leading in the digital and orbital warfare as well. And you also have missile shields and surveillance constellations that watch the Earth real time. Now, when we start talking about militaries, we like to talk about the fun stuff. We like to talk about the weapons and weapon systems and strategy and the troop types and so forth. But amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. So there's a command called US Transcom. And these guys can deliver tanks, fuel, and food to war zones before your enemy even has boots on the ground. Think about the implications of that. So we have global supply chains via air, sea, rail, and even space in some instances. On top of that, we have sea and air dominance in this global chessboard, if you will. So the US controls both the skies and the seas, and that's not just symbolic, that's literally the foundation of global supremacy. To put some perspective on this, 90% of world trade is moved by sea, and the US Navy has the ability to protect it or disrupt it at will. These carrier strike groups are literally floating cities, right? They're these their own sovereign bases. And again, they have the ability of launching war or relief missions without asking anyone's permission. And of course, if you own the sky, that's dominance, right? So what's that mean? That means that you see first, strike first, and win fast. We have jets, drones, and satellites, and that gives these US commanders a real time view of the battlefield anywhere on Earth. This is how the US fights wars before others even begin to mobilize and prepare. So once you have this level of supremacy, geography becomes irrelevant and borders lose meaning. America doesn't need to conquer territory anymore because it controls the outcomes from above and offshore. Now, let's talk about the branches. So we have the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, Space Force, And all these guys, they work as one. So we have real-time battlefield visibility through C4 ISR, which is command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Another important factor, very important factor, is the NCO Corps and its decentralized command. So the US, the non-commissioned officers, so think about your sergeants, right? Your staff sergeants and technical sergeants and things of this sort, right? They make frontline decisions. And this, believe it or not, is a global rarity in comparison to other militaries. So to give you a quick example, if we look at a more classical, old school military like the Russian military, they they have top down command, which basically their top commanders or generals, they have to make a decision, and then that orders trickle down all the way down to your units, right? All the way down to your platoon sergeant, as an example. So that platoon sergeant or that armored unit can't move or can't make real time decisions unless it comes from the command up top. And obviously, in a war scenario, in a wartime scenario, time is currency. So if again, U.S. military or NATO forces have a more versatile, flexible force, more dexterity, and they give more trust into their NCOs, right, their sergeants, to make decisions without having to rely solely on their officers and generals all the time, then that gives you a strategic advantage as well, right? And that also creates adaptability, morale, and trust at every level. Now, let's talk about the US intelligence supremacy. So we have organizations like NSA, CIA, DIA, NGA, and it's essentially a planetary surveillance web. And US intel often knows an enemy's move before they do. So imagine with our satellites, we can track enemy movements, see where they're going to position themselves, even determine before they do where the best position would be for them to go to, and then just act preemptively and have everything ready to go. Another thing that's not talked about enough and is controversial, and it's always has a negative stigmatism to it, is the military industrial complex. But let me give you another perspective on this, right? On this industrial firepower, if you will. So we have companies like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. These are defense giants with vertical integration, meaning they can make everything in-house. So they can design, build, and deploy new weapon systems at wartime speed. Weapons and munitions, again, are pre-positioned worldwide for rapid escalation. So these are assets in a way as well. On top of that, we also have the Reserve and National Guard angle or depth to it as well. So these are massive trained reserve forces that are on constant standby, and it gives you a strategic depth without the peacetime cost. Now, here's a fun fact. The US military is the largest single oil consumer on Earth, but it's also fully self-sustaining. So it has strategic depots, it has naval oilers and contingency logistics for long, drawn-out, sustained campaigns. On top of that, the U.S. military also has the nuclear triad. So this is land-based ICBMs, nuclear bombers, and the ballistic missile submarines, right? Or the subs, excuse me, that carry the ballistic missiles. So when you have this, your second strike guarantee also acts as a nuclear deterrent as well. And as of now, it's still pretty airtight. Now, another aspect of the military that I want to talk about is sort of the cultural and psychological reach. So think of the U.S. military as a brand, right? So from Hollywood to humanitarian ops, the U.S. is a soft power, but it amplifies hard power. And what I mean by this is, like, when the Marines land on your shore, the brand does as well. In other words, you know who's there. So another aspect of this that's not discussed enough, because it's sort of boring, right? It's not about the fun stuff like the weapon systems and the troops and so forth. Is the wargaming, right? Future proofing. So the Pentagon, they simulate future wars daily. They conduct cyber sieges and space conflict and island invasions. The next war is often modeled before it's ever fought. So, they know what type of troops they're going to use, what weapon systems they're going to use, how they're going to deploy them, when they're going to deploy them. And they play these war games, 10, 15 years before the next war. Then we have cyber and electronic warfare. So offensive cyber units could shut down grids before the first missile is ever fired. Imagine shutting down your electricity before we, throw a missile your way. And again, you have electronic warfare, right? Which can do things like, for example, blind enemy radar, jam communications, and disrupt or spoof, if you will, GPS signals. Then we have also things like DARPA, right? Think of the innovation of DARPA. They gave us the internet, GPS, stealth. And they have this sort of fail fast culture, right? That pushes boundaries that most militaries can't even begin to imagine, let alone keep up with. And then we also have this civilian military intelligence synergistic system, if you will, right? Or loop. So if you look at Silicon Valley, it's filled with ex-military veterans, if you will, working in Silicon Valley. We have defense think tanks. We have academia, places like Annapolis, West Point, the Kennedy School for Special Warfare. Again, and this ensures a sort of living, ever-evolving doctrine, not this static command. Imagine having these guys who served 20 years, and again, now they're working in places like Silicon Valley or the Pentagon, right? And they're adding their input and so forth into, future defense programs. Of course, the power, right? It's also in the diversity. Diversity as a strategic power, if you will, because power isn't just about steel and soldiers. It's about minds, languages, and cultures. So think of it this way. Let's say you're going to do an operation in the Middle East. You're going to need Arabic speakers. If you're going to deploy Marines into the Pashtiri Valley in Afghanistan, well, you're going to need some Pashto-speaking Marines. If you're going to conduct operations in the South China Sea or possible conflict with Taiwan, you're going to need Filipino-American advisors, right? Because Philippines is one of the biggest islands down there that might eventually would get involved in that conflict as well. So the U.S. troops, they fight globally. So they must understand the local culture and customs, right? And that's not politics. That's precision. That's how you win hearts and minds, if you will. Now, a lot of our innovation is done through diversity, right? So think of like the most complex problems: cybersecurity, space warfare, AI. These are solved by, again, diverse teams with divergent thinking from different backgrounds and different perspectives and different ways of seeing things. So having a cognitive variety gives you an asymmetrical advantage. And to add to this, you also get cohesion through purpose. Modern combat units prove that through shared missions and instead of shared backgrounds, if you will, right? So you could personalize this. Think about this in your workplace or something of that sort. Or maybe you joined a yoga class or a CrossFit gym or something like that. Again, express this through any medium, but if you guys have a shared mission, your race, your background, your ethnicity doesn't matter, right? You're going to build unit cohesion and camaraderie through that shared, if you will, objective or incentive. So again, you can reference this to a workplace environment. You can reference this to perhaps an exercise group that you're in, like CrossFit or something like that. You know what I'm talking about. So this is vital for the U.S. military, right? These integrated brigades in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, they performed with elite precision under the most intense pressure. And to, again, add to this, America's future force must reflect America's people. Because if you shrink your pool, you're going to shrink your power. So I want to talk about some internal threats, right? That the U.S. military is facing today, right? All this political undermining, if you will. So recently, the DEI programs in the military are being dismantled under Secretary Pete Hegseth. For example, the Women in Peace and Security programs, they've been canceled. The Navajo Code Talker histories, which are vital in World War II. This has been scrubbed along with the Tuskegee Airmen. Again, it's a rollback of a strategic advantage to me that's disguised as ideology. And make no mistake, removing diversity doesn't make the force stronger. What it does is it makes it blind, brittle, and predictable. So to give you a comparison, right, we could compare the US versus China and Russia when it comes to these factors. So in the United States, diversity high. In China, low. And in Russia, it's even lower and it's corruption bound. In the United States, it's intelligence because of its diversity. It's global. In China, it's only regionally focused. And in Russia, it's legacy driven, right? It's very, old school cloak and dagger, James Bond, um, you know, boots on the ground spies, right? Yeah, it's not as effective anymore. And then, of course, when it comes to adaptability, think about all the things I just mentioned, right? The United States has the strongest, if not the highest. In China, it's coercive and it's very moderate because they're very authoritarian. And in Russia, it's minimal and at borderline fragile. Russia fights with old tanks, with weak logistics, and with these blunt trauma tactics, right? Basically, meat assaults, if you will. And China is modern, but again, they're way too authoritarian and way too rigid. So only the US military fights, again, with the full spectrum of minds, machines, culture, and chaos. So again, to drive this point home, the US military is not just a hammer, it's an organism, right? It's this machine, world machine. The eyes are the satellites, the drones, the informants. The brain is this C4ISR, right? Doctrine. And it's this real time command. The arteries would be like the logistics networks that run across the oceans. The limbs are, again, the carrier groups, the ranger teams, the cyber divisions. And the blood made of the people from every background serving one mission. This is what Russia fears. This is what China's trying to imitate. And it's what keeps the world in balance. So I hope this was informative. And like always, remember, guys, to lift more, eat more, rest more, love more, and hate less. And stay tuned for future episodes. Thank you.